The name changed from the 86s to the 97s. Finally, the 99s was the name that stuck. Amelia worked to get more women pilots to join. By the following summer, the 99s had almost 200 members. The group helped women pilots get jobs. The 99s also had an office where careful records of women's aviation achievements could be kept. Amelia Earhart was elected the first president of the group. Sometimes, Amelia felt she didn't deserve all the praise that the public gave her. But she had truly earned the respect of the other women flyers, and it meant a lot to her. Chapter 6. Amelia the Businesswoman. In the fall of 1929, the stock market crashed. Many people lost a lot of money. Many also lost their jobs. It was the start of the Great Depression. Amelia worried about her parents who had split up again. Her mother was living with Amelia's sister and husband. Amelia helped out by giving her mother some money every month. Her father was ill, so Amelia bought the log cabin in Los Angeles where he was living. Amelia felt a strong sense of duty to her parents. Amelia had to keep earning money, but that was not easy during the Depression. She still gave speeches, but she had another job too. Amelia helped start an airline on the East Coast. It was called the New York, Philadelphia, and Washington Airway, because it flew between those cities. Amelia's job was to convince people to fly on the airline. It was difficult to run an airline in the early days. Only a few cities had airports. Once, 3 planes arrived in Philadelphia at the same time. Some passengers had to change planes. Some people just got off to stretch their legs. But airline workers got confused. They put people on the wrong planes. Some were accidentally flown back to the city they had just left. Another problem on the early flights was air sickness. It wasn't just the bumps. Fumes from the engine often came into the cabin. There also was no air conditioning. Sometimes, more than half of the passengers on a plane threw up. Still, more than 1,500 passengers flew on the tiny airline during the first 10 days. Amelia was happy to report that almost half the tickets had been sold to women. Besides working with the airline and taking care of her family, Amelia was still trying to set records. That was part of being Amelia Earhart, the celebrity. In the summer of 1930, Amelia set 3 new speed records. The fastest speed she recorded was 180 miles per hour. Today, the average passenger jet flies at around 500 to 700 miles per hour. Amelia was doing exactly what she had dreamed of doing. It was an exciting time. But then, in September of 1930, Amelia received bad news. Her father had cancer. He would not live much longer. Amelia flew out to see him in California. She stayed with her father for 4 days. She took care of him and said her goodbyes. During her return trip to New York, she got word that her father had died. It was a very sad time for Amelia. She missed her father. She also was under a lot of pressure. She worked for an airline. She gave speeches all over the country. She raced her airplane and set records. She took care of her family. Amelia was tired. She needed help. Amelia turned to her longtime manager, George Putnam. George Putnam was divorced now and wanted to marry Amelia. Amelia had said no many times. But maybe marriage to George Putnam could be different. George was 10 years older than Amelia. He already had 2 grown children. George wouldn't expect Amelia to stay at home. In fact, he wanted to help her become even more famous. Amelia decided to take the risk. On February 7, 1931, she and George Putnam were married. Both bride and groom were in agreement on one important issue. Amelia would definitely keep her career. And although she didn't plan it, she even got to keep her name. Although she officially became Amelia Earhart Putnam after her marriage, the press didn't like the change. They soon dropped the Putnam and called her Amelia Earhart, just as they always had. Chapter 7. Pushing the Limits. By 1931, there were many changes in the world of flying. Slow, wood-framed planes had been replaced with faster, all-metal models. The new planes had better instruments. Pilots could find their locations more easily and fly more safely. The newer planes were bigger and carried more passengers. Slowly the public was won over to airplane travel. After all, it took 4 hours to go to Washington from New York by train. By plane, the trip was only 2.5 hours. In 1930, the first 3 flight attendants were hired by United Airlines. They were all nurses. They served meals and then took care of airsick passengers. There were also more than 450 licensed female pilots in the United States. With more competition, it was getting harder to keep the public's interest. Amelia needed to do something different. She and George came up with a few ideas. Amelia started flying something called an autogyro. It was almost like a helicopter. Amelia became the first person to go across the country and back in an autogyro. But the autogyro was hard to fly. Many pilots thought it wasn't safe.